The time when social networks have become an integral part of teenagers' daily lives has brought new threats and dangers, as the tragic story of Diamond Bradley reminds us. This young girl, like many others, was fond of communicating on the internet, not realizing that attractive online personalities could be real monsters. Diamond Marsh Bradley was born on March 21, 2001 in Clarksville, Tennessee. She was the younger sister of Daquan, who was 3 years older than her. At some point, their parents Doris and Philip decided to divorce, and Doris decided to move Daquan and Diamond to the small town of Spring Valley, Illinois, where their relatives lived. She wanted to provide the children with a calmer and safer environment away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Spring Valley is a quiet town located along the Illinois River. In 2002, its population barely reached 5,000, and it hasn't grown much since. There were no large shopping centers or skyscrapers, but instead the residents built a tight-knit community, relying on each other for support. Doris got a job as a cook in a retirement home where she worked for over 15 years, providing for her children's needs. Over time, when Doris was unable to be there, Daquan became a guardian, mentor, and big brother to Diamond, establishing a deep connection with her that has grown into a lasting friendship over the years. Diamond also spent a lot of time with her cousin Giovanna, whose resemblance was so striking that many people confused them for twins. Doris later gave birth to 2 more children, a girl named Malia and a boy named Quentin. Despite Spring Valley's idyllic conditions for raising children, its main drawback was the lack of entertainment for teenagers. Diamond was a typical girl who loved to sing, dance, play with her siblings, and organize photo shoots. She also spent a lot of time on the internet, as social media and smartphones were becoming increasingly popular among young people. Gradually, Diamond began to actively communicate with other users online, looking for company, entertainment, and communication. By 2014, when she was about 13 years old, she began actively posting various content on her social media page. Diamond shared details of her personal relationships, invitations to meet up, expressed her love for her family and admiration for her mother, whom she considered the best in the world. Sometimes she was looking for advice or just sharing her thoughts. Throughout her teenage years, Diamond experienced the emotional changes inherent in the journey from childhood to adulthood. There were times when she felt a severe lack of trust or an overwhelming desire to confide in someone. Although Doris and other family members interacted with her posts, Diamond often sought attention from other social media users. Due to the limited amount of entertainment in Spring Valley, she began to develop an interest in boys, and social media became a kind of digital diary for her. She regularly updated her thoughts, publishing several posts a day. Her posts made it easy to follow how the life and thoughts of this teenage girl were developing at the time. She valued and respected her family, but sometimes felt deeply lonely, looking for an interlocutor in the online community. She openly admitted to not having any friends. She wanted affection. She needed someone to whom she could confide her innermost thoughts and feelings. Of course, social networks reflected only a part of a person's real life. However, they did give an idea of what this young lady was worried about and concerned about. At the time, Diamond was a high school student and had recently started dating Nicholas Nelson. They seemed like a cute couple, spending a lot of time together, and seemed to be really in love with each other. Diamond didn't like school. In the fall of 2017, she intended to graduate through a special program, passing her exams. Despite her young age, she had great ambitions. She had deep compassion and wanted to pursue a career as a nurse. On January 23, 2018, the Bradley home was crowded and noisy as friends and family gathered to celebrate Doris's birthday. The night was full of love and joy. There was a birthday cake, music was playing, and everyone was enjoying the company of loved ones. Doris had no idea that in less than 24 hours her life would be shattered. That night, after 10 p.m., the guests began to leave, and Doris told her daughter that she was going to bed. Diamond said goodbye to her mother and went to take a shower. Doris usually woke up a little before 7 a.m., prepared breakfast, and sent her younger children to school. She expected her eldest daughter to be up and about by this time, but Diamond was nowhere to be found. Her upstairs room was empty. At first, Doris was not concerned, thinking that her daughter might have run out to get her morning coffee at the nearest gas station, as she often did. However, As time passed and Diamond did not return, Doris's anxiety grew. Diamond didn't have her own transportation, and it was a wet, windy winter outside. Not the weather for walking. Doris's attempts to contact her daughter by phone were in vain. The calls went straight to voicemail, which was very unusual for Diamond. Around 8:30, Daquan, who was living separately due to his busy schedule, visited them as they had agreed. The absence of any response from Diamond to numerous calls and messages worried him and his mother, as she never bothered them on purpose. With each passing hour, their concern grew, and despite all attempts to contact Diamond's friends, no one had any information about her whereabouts. Daquan traveled all over the city looking for his sister, but there were almost no places to hide in their small town. Doris was overwhelmed by a variety of emotions: fear, anger, and terrible premonitions of the worst. Diamond had never disappeared without a word before. Doris's anxiety became unbearable, and when all options were exhausted, at 6 p.m. she was forced to report her daughter's disappearance to the police. Law enforcement officials first focused on tracking Diamond's cell phone activity. After contacting her service provider, they found out that the phone's last known location was 8 kilometers northwest of the nearest cell tower in Tonopah, Illinois. However, this information only gave an approximate search area without providing exact coordinates, so Diamond's whereabouts remained unknown. After 7:18 a.m., her phone either ran out of power or was intentionally turned off, as it has not sent any signal since then, and Diamond has not been on social media. Doris hoped that her daughter might have told her cousin Giovanna, whom she often confided her innermost thoughts to, about her plans. However, Giovanna was unable to provide any information about Diamond's intentions the morning after their last conversation that evening. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Giovanna decided to reveal to Doris an important secret to Doris. Diamond had a second phone hidden from her family to access the internet via Wi-Fi. Daquan accidentally found this phone, password protected and without a SIM card, in a dresser drawer. This discovery came as a shock to Doris, who had no idea about her daughter's second secret phone. Realizing the urgent need for any clues, she immediately handed the device over to the police in the hope that it would help solve the mystery of Diamond's disappearance. After examining the phone, law enforcement officials concluded that the device had been used for certain activities that Diamond did not want her mother to know about. Although each application required a separate password, the lock screen showed notifications with numerous invitations to meet Diamond from various people. The investigation revealed that the 16-year-old was using the phone to communicate on dating sites, which came as a real shock to Doris. She had no idea about her daughter's secret life on the internet. As Giovanna later told us, Diamond was interested in making money by meeting men for financial rewards. Doris felt like a terrible mother, not knowing that her underage daughter could be involved in such activities. Daquan, however, had a different view. Their mother had always been able to combine strictness with giving her children some freedom. Probably, Diamond simply did not realize the danger of such meetings. Perhaps she was hoping that she would only be paid to spend time on dates, especially with older men who she thought would be more financially generous. Deep down, she was exploring life with the naivety of youth, unaware of the dangers that could lurk on these platforms, the unseen threat from those who seek to exploit the most vulnerable. The temptation of easy money for spending time on dates was a dangerous curiosity. The police realized that many young people in Spring Valley were caught in a monotonous net where their main fascination was the digital world, which their guardians barely touched. This disconnect left many parents unaware of the digital dangers their children faced on a daily basis. Because of the growing concern, local police sought the assistance of the FBI, using their advanced resources to access and analyze data from Diamond's primary phone in order to recreate her movements on the day she disappeared. This cooperation yielded results. They were able to track Diamond's route, which indicated that she was traveling by car at high speed. A thorough review of CCTV in the area revealed 13 vehicles, but poor image quality made it impossible to recognize license plates. Using an inventive approach, the police placed a patrol car with a dash cam at a strategic intersection. After 2 days of surveillance, they were able to filter out the vehicles that frequently passed by, identifying a red pickup truck and a black SUV that were no longer seen in the area. Lacking direct evidence to prioritize these vehicles, law enforcement decided to narrow their focus methodically, starting with them. Further review of the video linked the black Range Rover to another location on Diamond's last known route, focusing the investigation on that location. At the same time, detectives studied Diamond's digital footprints, analyzing her correspondence on dating apps and social networks. The final message sent by Diamond on the morning of her disappearance to a 26-year-old man named Gerald, or Jay as his friends called him, was the decisive one. During the investigation, this Jay admitted to a romantic relationship with Diamond, but stated that he had stopped contact after learning her true age. On the morning of January 24th at 6 a.m., Diamond invited Jay to meet her at the IHOP restaurant. However, almost immediately she withdrew the invitation, apologizing and saying that the message was addressed to someone else. Jay responded with an emoji with a smile. At 6:40 a.m., he received an alarming message from Diamond. "I'm dying." Upon learning that Jay was the last person her 16-year-old daughter had contacted, Doris was overcome with anger and despair, accusing him of harming her child. In her grief, she was ready to blame any suspect. However, Jay provided a convincing alibi, claiming that he had been at home all night playing video games in the presence of a female companion. Initially, he did not want to reveal her identity, but under pressure, it turned out that this woman was none other than Giovanna, Diamond's cousin, which added confusion to the investigation but did not advance the search for the girl. Turning their attention back to the black SUV, investigators discovered additional video footage of the vehicle on the road to Putnam County. It was there that the sign from Diamond's phone disappeared, either due to a power outage or a dead battery. This vehicle became the key to finding out Diamond's fate. Unfortunately, the situation was further escalated when on January 27th, 3 days after Diamond was reported missing, the Putnam County Sheriff's Department received an important call around noon that indicated a tragic turn in the search for the missing girl. A passerby walking along the Pebble Trail in Granville County had discovered the body of a young woman in a ditch by the road. Upon arriving, the Putnam police chief immediately realized that it was a foul play. The body had numerous wounds on the back, abdomen, legs, arms, and hands. The police chief remembered that a girl of the same description as the deceased had been reported missing in Spring Valley and immediately called there. The area was rural, with snow-covered cornfields stretching around it, and the nearest housing was several miles away. Diamond Bradley's body was partially submerged in water as a stream ran through the area. Signs of fierce resistance indicated that the girl had put up a desperate fight to the last. After the horrific discovery that Diamond Bradley had been murdered, the senior detective made the sad trip to the Bradley home with the difficult task of breaking the tragic news to the family. As soon as the police arrived on the doorstep at around 7 p.m., Doris felt a terrible premonition of grief, a mother's intuition. Her despair, even before the news was announced, spoke volumes. Daquan's return to his home, shrouded in grief, forced him to confront a reality far removed from his hopes for his sister's return. The realization that Diamond had been found dead was so overwhelming that he fainted, a tribute to the strong bonds of brotherhood and the unfulfilled promises he had made to himself. When the terrible news spread through the small town, every resident was extremely upset. The thought that their children could now walk the streets freely filled them with terror. What if the monster is still around and hunting for its next victim? The investigative team carefully studied the CCTV footage of the black SUV. To narrow down the search, the police consulted a workshop that specializes in such car models. The technician carefully examined the video and confidently identified the car as a certain model line and year of manufacture of the Wrangler Jeep. Armed with these details, the officers entered the data into their databases, searching for addresses and names of owners of similar Jeeps in the area. After checking with a number of owners of similar Jeeps, the officers came across a residence a few kilometers north of where Diamond's body was found. The woman who answered the door said that the owner of the Black Ranger had moved to another municipality, Stendard, but she did not know his new address. Stendard, located only 2 miles away and with a population of about 200, did not seem difficult to find. Driving through the neighborhood, police spotted a black Range Rover Jeep in the driveway of a house. The car belonged to 26-year-old Richard Henderson, who had indeed driven into Spring Valley on January 24th and stopped at a gas station across from Bradley's house, as evidenced by surveillance video. At first, he claimed to have dropped Diamond off at a mobile home park, but this version contradicted the evidence of her phone's location. During a ride with detectives along the route Henderson and Diamond had traveled that day, he admitted to meeting the girl. Their initial plans did not go through. During a ride with the detectives along the route Henderson and Diamond were traveling that day, he admitted to meeting the girl. Their initial plans did not go through. Henderson claimed to have left Diamond at a mobile home park, the location of which contradicted the trajectory of Diamond's phone. This discrepancy led to suspicions of phone theft or lying. With the opportunity to obtain a full confession, detectives offered Henderson a ride in a patrol car, recreating the route they had taken with Diamond on the day she disappeared. They left the station, passed the intersection captured on video, drove over a bridge, and ended up in rural Putnam County. The journey ended at the point where Diamond's phone signal was lost. The only remnants of the young girl were stuffed animals and artificial flowers on her memorial wreath by the creek, tragic signs left by her family. The bright flowers stood in stark contrast to the surrounding snowy white landscape. These things, like Diamond herself, were out of place here. The young gentle girl was abandoned in this hollow, her life bleeding out. When the detective asked Henderson if he recognized this place, he could not contain his emotions. Tears streamed down his face. Taking advantage of this emotional moment, the investigator urged him to tell what really happened. Henderson, overwhelmed with grief, looked away from the monument, sobbing. His explanation was brief, and their meeting in this lonely place was intimate. Afterward, when Henderson asked her to leave the car, Diamond refused and instead pulled out a knife. A struggle ensued, during which, according to Henderson, he acted in self-defense. He claimed that when he tried to pull her hand away from the knife, the blades accidentally bit into her stomach. Despite this, Diamond allegedly continued to attack aggressively. Henderson admitted that he disarmed her and may have struck her twice, as he claimed, in self-defense, before leaving her in the ditch. However, the autopsy results contradicted his story, revealing more than 20 stab wounds on Diamond's body, including several on her back. At almost 1.8 meters tall and weighing twice as much as Diamond, who was barely over 1.5 meters, Henderson's explanation seemed absurd. He was a grown man confronting a child. By the time they started searching, Diamond was already dead. More than 200 people attended the funeral, including family, friends, peers, and teachers from Spring Valley High School. Doris decided to have her daughter's body cremated because she couldn't bear the thought of leaving her in a cemetery. So she carried Diamond's urn everywhere she went, including in the courtroom at Henderson's sentencing. Henderson entered into a plea agreement to avoid life in prison and was sentenced to 53 years without parole. Doris admitted that she had thoughts of suicide due to the unbearable absence of her daughter. However, her concern for her other children kept her from doing so. This is the end of the story. Doris admitted that she had thoughts of suicide because of the unbearable absence of her daughter. However, her concern for her other children kept her from doing so. The tragedy that befell the Bradley family is a reminder of the dangers that can lie in online interactions and online dating, especially for teenagers. This story highlights how young Diamond's naivety and curiosity, combined with her desire for attention and romantic relationships, led to a fatal encounter. Despite her mother's warnings to be careful when dealing with strangers, Diamond secretly engaged in risky activities on dating sites, where she crossed paths with Richard Henderson. Henderson's cruelty and ruthlessness toward a defenseless teenage girl shocked the entire town. The police investigation revealed the depth of the danger Diamond faced when she frivolously risked her own safety in search of attention and romance in the digital world. Her tragic fate was a bitter lesson in the need for caution, education, and parental supervision in the age of social media. Diamond's voice has been forever silenced, but her story continues to resonate as a warning to other teens and their families about the potential dangers that can lurk behind attractive online personas. Her memory remains a reminder of the price that can be paid for recklessness in the virtual world. Melissa Louise Grimley was born on April 21, 1971, to Barbara and Ted Grimley. They lived in Lugano, a modest Sydney suburb of about 5,000 inhabitants. Melissa's childhood was comfortable. Her father worked for an insurance company and her mother was a physiotherapist. The family belonged to the middle class, and her parents were actively involved in charity work at the local Lions Club, trying to support their community. Melissa was an ordinary, unremarkable girl. She did not shine in her studies, but she was fond of fashion from an early age. After high school, she enrolled in secretarial and business courses at Patrick College in Sydney. She got her first job as an administrator in the investment department of the National Road Association. Melissa was very interested in finance. One evening in 1992, when she decided to relax in a bar after a busy work week, she met an attractive man. After drinking too much, Melissa fell in love, but a few months later, she woke up penniless. The man had maxed out her credit cards and stolen many valuable items from her home. Melissa felt devastated, but she learned an important lesson. Money and trust in the wrong hands can be easily used for evil. However, she did not use this knowledge to benefit others. In 1998, the ambitious Melissa got a job as an office administrator at the Sydney branch of an investment bank. Having access to large sums of money, she did not behave any better than her cheating lover, despite her bitter experience with him. 6 months later, it turned out that Melissa had stolen $2,000 from the company's accounts by forging the manager's signature on several checks. Upon learning of this, the bank's management decided not to disclose the incident. Instead of a police investigation, she was allowed to resign at will. Moreover, she was not even charged with the stolen money, as the amount was deemed too small for a public scandal. To distract herself from her dismissal, Melissa focused on her personal life. She met a British man, Tony Cuddick, and married him in April 2000. Melissa also took up weight loss and fitness by hiring a personal trainer. Through him, she met various clients, including a respected financial advisor. He was a top executive in a currency trading and finance firm that needed a new office manager. Melissa, of course, jumped at the chance and quickly became friends with him. Soon after, he hired her to join his team. Working hard in her new position, Melissa excelled. She quickly figured out which risks were worth taking and which were not. By 2002, she had saved enough money to invest $750,000 in the firm and take a 25% stake in it. Melissa's achievements were so impressive that she was featured on the cover of the Independent Financial Advisor, an industry publication, with the headline, "Good Choices, Best Practices in Financial Planning in Australia." In the magazine, Melissa warned readers against pyramid schemes and various scams, advising them to check the licenses, qualifications, and ethical standards of financial advisors. This sound advice was later tinged with irony. Within a year, Melissa was bored with her constructive role and wanted to expand her investments into real estate and the stock market. However, her employer had strict rules and refused to make concessions. After a particularly heated argument, Melissa left the firm in 2004, taking her $750,000. The sudden change in circumstances prompted Melissa and her husband Tony to move to England, where he lived before moving to Australia. In the summer of 2006, thanks to Melissa's previous financial success, they were already living in a beautiful house in Essex, northeast of London. Tony had successfully completed his law degree and landed a prestigious job. At the same time, the couple had a son. It would seem that the family had reached the pinnacle of prosperity. But neither the move to a new country, nor the change in lifestyle, nor even the joy of motherhood satisfied Melissa. While Tony spent many hours commuting to work in London, she was often left alone in the house. Melissa could have found a job, but instead she started cheating on her husband. A few months later, Tony found out that she was having an affair with her longtime friend, Sydney-based personal hairdresser Anthony Coletti. Melissa was secretly siphoning off the family money, flying with her lover to European cities, allegedly to attend financial conferences. Tony tried to sort things out, but instead of apologizing, Melissa got angry and blamed him for everything. The quarrel almost turned into a fight, so Tony decided to go to his parents' house for a few days, leaving his wife and son at home. But when he returned a few days later, Melissa, along with the child, most of the furniture, and all the money they had together had disappeared. Melissa ruthlessly robbed Tony, selling off their furniture and clothes and fleeing with their son back to Sydney. When she returned home in January 2012, she launched a campaign to vilify her husband. She called him a traitor, a pathological liar, an abusive person, and a negligent father, although these accusations remained largely unproven. Shortly after returning to Australia in January 2012, Melissa got together with a new partner, Anthony Coletti. She also took over her and Tony's real estate in England and sold it for about $1.3 million. With this money, Melissa began to live large. She bought a luxurious 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom house in the Rose Bay neighborhood. It was there that her pyramid scheme officially started. Throughout her life, Melissa had been striving for big money, but her financial transactions often ended badly. The early deception of her insidious lover taught her a cunning lesson. Money and trust in the wrong hands can be easily used for malicious purposes. From forging signatures on checks to driving her own husband into poverty, Melissa quickly learned these practices. She ruthlessly exploited others in her pursuit of profit, but she quickly grew bored with the routine. Increasingly, Melissa thought about how to achieve her ambitions, and a grand scam was brewing in her mind. It wasn't a new idea. She had been harboring it for a long time, but hadn't put it into action yet. By then, Melissa was already quite wealthy, but she wasn't going to stop. The thought of defrauding just a few people seemed petty to her. Instead, she developed a complex strategy designed to defraud an army of investors. In 2012, Melissa began implementing her large-scale scam. Ironically, she ignored her own advice from the cover of the magazine about checking financial advisors' licenses. Melissa began to pose as a financial advisor to friends and family, promising that investments in her fund would generate substantial legitimate returns. In fact, she had neither the appropriate accreditation nor experience. After receiving money from investors, Melissa created fake screenshots of trading accounts and sent out fake monthly reports of allegedly sky-high returns of 10%, 20%, and even 30%. These high-class fakes built up investor confidence. They either increased investments or brought Melissa new clients. Her bank account grew rapidly from thousands to millions of dollars. She defrauded friends, former colleagues, a personal trainer, relatives, and even her own parents. Melissa's spending became more and more audacious and excessive. She carelessly spent other people's money on luxury cars, designer clothes, art, and jewelry. For example, she spent more than $48,000 on Chanel products, $275,000 on foreign travel, $229,000 in Dior boutiques, and more than $25,000 on protein shakes. All of this outrageously expensive lifestyle was financed by her circle of friends and family, who did not even realize it. To create an atmosphere of exclusivity around her business, Melissa lied to potential investors that her roster was full. But then she would lure them in with offers of allegedly newly vacant seats if they paid a quick deposit. In 2014, Melissa purchased a luxury estate on Orlando Road for over $6 million. This fashionable mansion had stunning views of the Sydney Harbor Bridge, spacious living rooms, a swimming pool, and a large dining room with a panoramic view of the city. In 2016, she presented her husband, Anthony Coletti, with a $390,000 Audi R8 with the license plate of his music label. Anthony was an amateur DJ and musician. Melissa herself also owned several expensive cars. Since 2009, she has traveled 25 times abroad, from Aspen ski resorts to remote islands in the Pacific Ocean. All of this was financed by her circle of friends and family. Melissa's parents even sold their house in South Sydney and entrusted their daughter with the proceeds to buy an apartment in Edgecliff on the condition that she would have the right to live there for life. Instead, Melissa registered the apartment in her name only and spent the money on a $590,000 diamond and other whimsical items. Not only did Melissa fraudulently acquire a huge fortune, but every year she spent millions to satisfy her own material whims. Vacations in luxury hotels, traveling by private jet, whatever her heart desired. This went on for 8 years, and all this time Melissa's pyramid scheme remained unpunished. She successfully ran a Ponzi scheme, covering payments to old investors with new ones. Melissa earned about $30 million by cheating. However, she was well aware that nothing lasts forever. She just chose to ignore it. The foundation of Melissa's fraud began to crack back in 2019 when the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, received a signal that Caddick was working as an unlicensed financial advisor. At first, this did not cause an immediate reaction, but by June 2020, the case did attract the attention of investigators. It turned out that Melissa did not have an Australian financial services license. In addition, she had illegally used the documents of a longtime colleague and friend, adding her own name to them. This discovery alarmed the commission, because by that time, Caddick had already swindled about $30 million from clients. So ASIC put Melissa under close surveillance. For several months, they meticulously documented her every transaction. This thorough investigation eventually provided irrefutable evidence of fraud. On November 10, 2020, the regulator froze Melissa's assets and confiscated her passport. The next day, her luxury estate worth more than $6 million was searched by police. During the raid, Caddick was visibly disturbed. Her behavior showed that she was aware of the precariousness of her situation. Her life of luxury had come to an end. She faced a long prison sentence for the seriousness of her crimes. It is therefore not surprising that early the next morning after the search and seizure of her assets, Melissa disappeared without a trace. On the morning of November 12, 2020, before dawn, Melissa quietly woke up, put on a tracksuit, and slipped out of the room while Anthony was sleeping. She put on her sneakers and headed for the exit. When the door clicked softly, her 14-year-old son heard it. That was the last moment Melissa was seen alive. Anthony didn't report his wife's disappearance to the police until 11:30 the next morning, 30 hours later. The news prompted detectives to launch an intensive investigation. Given Melissa's financial fraud exposed the day before, investigators considered her sudden disappearance extremely suspicious. ASIC, which had already been closely scrutinizing her fraudulent schemes, viewed this démarche as an attempt to avoid punishment. A week passed without a single trace. The family of the missing woman was terribly worried. They contacted her through the media, begging her to give them a sign that she was okay. Everyone realized that the situation was serious. Melissa had defrauded not just anybody for millions of dollars, but really influential people, and her own friends and relatives as well. All of them knew how brazenly she had squandered their investments and where she lived. The question was whether Melissa had disappeared of her own free will, or whether her fate was payback at the hands of an angry investor. Investigators began by checking Melissa's phone records. After her disappearance, her cell phone was silent. No calls, no messages, nothing. She left her phone and keys at home. Her bank accounts were also frozen. Then the police began to study the surveillance footage from the Caddick's house. But even there, the woman was not caught on camera. Despite their best efforts, no camera in the neighborhood had captured Melissa that morning. The conclusion was that if she did leave the neighborhood, it was probably in someone else's car. Another scenario that the cops considered was what if Melissa hadn't left the neighborhood and was just hiding somewhere. But this version seemed unlikely. The Caddick estate is located in the attractive Dover Heights neighborhood, whose name fully justifies itself. To the west of it stretches the panorama of Sydney, and to the east, steep cliffs plunge into the ocean. Those cliffs are only about 300 meters from Orlando Road, where Melissa lived. So in desperation, some speculated that the con artist could have jumped off the cliff into the waves. However, for Anthony and Melissa's family, this version seemed absurd. She adored her son and would never have left him, even if she had faced prison. Although the charges were serious, Melissa could have gotten off with a short prison sentence or a large fine. Anthony argued that his wife would not have done that. Therefore, investigators, in the absence of any evidence or a body, also rejected the suicide version. The police expanded the search to the entire territory of Australia. But with her passport confiscated, Melissa could not legally travel abroad. Due to the specifics of the case, the news of Caddick's mysterious disappearance spread like wildfire. At first, it was discussed by all the residents of Dover Heights, then Sydney, and then the whole country. Eyewitnesses began to report seeing Melissa in different parts of Australia, Brisbane, Melbourne, and even in distant Darwin. Now she was recognized by millions. It seemed that the scammer had nowhere to go. Investigators hoped that she would eventually turn herself in. Until 101 days after she disappeared, the ocean brought a gruesome discovery to the shore. On February 21, 2021, two people were picking up trash on Bjornda Beach, 400 kilometers south of Caddick's home. From a distance, they noticed a gray sneaker sticking out of the sand. When they got closer, they saw a horrifying sight, a human foot inside. The discovery was spreading a disgusting stench, and the contents looked rotten and yellowed. The sneaker had obviously washed up on the shore just a few hours ago. The size and model matched Melissa's favorite shoes. While forensic scientists tested the DNA, oceanographers analyzed the currents in the Tasman Sea to understand how the severed foot ended up on a beach hundreds of kilometers from Sydney. A week later, genetic testing confirmed that the DNA from the foot was identical to samples taken from Melissa's toothbrush. Family members also identified the missing woman's sneakers. Despite this ominous evidence of Melissa's death, the public did not believe she was dead. Many people believe the incident was a clever trick to avoid a trial. Her husband, relatives, and friends all unanimously stated that Caddick would not commit suicide. In addition, his foot was too decomposed to swim in the ocean for all 3 months. Some even suggested that Melissa had cut off her own foot and thrown it on the beach to cover her tracks. These theories are still the subject of heated debate. On the other hand, in the last days before her disappearance, Caddick found herself in a hopeless situation. Arrest would mean the loss of freedom, wealth, connections, and family. Could despair have pushed her to take the fatal step off that cliff? It is unlikely that we will ever know, but despite the lack of new clues, we had to wait a long time for the official announcement of Melissa's death. Consequences and reflections. In May 2022, in the absence of hard evidence that Melissa was alive, the court finally declared her dead. The painful process of liquidating the property to partially compensate investors for their losses began. To Anthony's great regret, his expensive Audi R8 went at auction for half the price. Melissa's other assets, including collections of designer dresses, works of art, luxury goods, and jewelry, suffered the same fate. The proceeds were distributed among the defrauded depositors, but only a fraction was reimbursed. In October 2022, the infamous Dover Heights estate was also put up for sale. Anthony resisted to the last, but a federal court ordered him to get out of the house, which officially belonged to Melissa. At the same time, the man complained that he had only $1.95 left in his account and was completely at the mercy of the management company that handled his wife's frozen assets. Some investors lost their entire retirement savings. Others closed their businesses or sold real estate to follow Melissa's successful path. She lured them with the bright prospects of getting rich quick and living the luxurious life she demonstrated. These people believed her sweet promises and paid bitterly for it. Anthony himself also suffered reputational losses. Although he claimed that he was unaware of his wife's fraudulent schemes and considered all her wealth legitimate, investigators questioned his sincerity. Suspicions were also raised by the delay in reporting Melissa's disappearance. Was Anthony hiding something? So far, it remains a mystery. But after all this story, Anthony's career as a musician took off. The man even dedicated an entire album to Melissa's mysterious disappearance. In the lyrics, he portrays his wife as an innocent victim and the searches in their home as illegal. However, the quality of the lyrics is rather questionable. For example, one line threatens to turn his wife's head into spaghetti if she is touched, whatever that means. In general, the story of Melissa Caddick, who built her own financial empire on lies, still leaves more questions than answers. What happened to the disappeared swindler? Did a wave of remorse finally overwhelm her and push her to take the fatal step? Or maybe it was one of the deceived clients who decided to take revenge for their losses. Or is Melissa still living somewhere under an assumed name, enjoying her stolen millions? Melissa has been the subject of many podcasts and even a miniseries, but the truth seems to remain forever at the bottom of the ocean. However, the fate of the swindler is a warning to anyone who is willing to commit a crime for the sake of money and power. Greed and deceit eventually backfire on the fraudsters themselves, and punishment catches up with even the most cunning. And if someone is tempted by the thought of easy money, remember the sad story of Melissa. After all, you have to pay for everything in life. On the evening of July 13, 2019, the quiet idyll of the town of Inverness, Florida, was disrupted by a terrifying event. At 7:24 p.m., the 911 emergency service received a call from an agitated teenager. It was 17-year-old Carlos, who was crying for help for his mother, Denise. He told the dispatcher that he had woken up after a midday nap and saw his mother in her bed with her head smashed in and an axe stuck in her skull. The woman was still breathing but unresponsive to external stimuli. The frightened young man did not know how to help his loved one, and the emergency operator tried to calm him down and take him out of the house, as it was not certain whether the attacker was still hiding somewhere inside. This disturbing conversation prompted police and paramedics to immediately travel to the outskirts of Inverness to the Hollowell family's remote home. The officers, guns drawn, cautiously inspected the house to make sure no one was inside. Room by room, they checked every nook and cranny until they reached Denise's bedroom. The sight they saw there shocked even the seasoned cops. The hostess was lying on the bed with an axe sticking out of the back of her head. The blow had been delivered with such force that the blade had entered almost completely, restraining blood flow. Despite this, paramedics tried desperately to save Denise's life. Unfortunately, her injuries were incompatible with life. That same night, doctors officially pronounced Denise Hollowell dead from a chopped head wound. The police were confused by the fact that someone had broken into the house, killed the owner, but spared her son, and did not take any valuables. The house was located on the shore of a lake, far away from other houses. Only Denise's friends lived around it. Carlos's version that he did not hear or see anything because he was sleeping and woke up to find his mother in such a state was also taken into account. However, from the very beginning, law enforcement officers felt some dissonance in his words. They did not know that the investigation of this case would bring many unexpected discoveries about the life of Denise Hollowell and her family, and most importantly, about her relationship with her adopted children. To better understand the context of this tragic event, it is worth telling more about Denise Hollowell herself. In her small town, she was known as a sincere, kind, and caring woman of about 50 years of age. She worked as a veterinary nurse and a teacher at a private school, teaching natural and social sciences. Her students and their parents described her as an excellent teacher with an impeccable reputation. But Denise's biggest dream was to become a mother. She married twice, but both marriages were unsuccessful. After the divorces, she returned to live in the family home on the shore of the lake. Her best friends lived nearby, especially her childhood friend Amy, with whom Denise shared all her secrets. However, Denise was acutely aware that she lacked the most important thing in her life: children. But it was almost unrealistic to give birth on her own at her age. She had been an adopted child herself, so she understood perfectly well what love of foster parents means. She was determined to give family warmth to an orphan and turned to an agency that helped adopt children from Central America. There, Denise met a cute 4-year-old boy from Guatemala named Carlos. A spark immediately flashed between them, connecting the adult woman and the child with invisible bonds of love and trust. After adopting Carlos, Denise became incredibly happy. She adored her son, and it seemed that fate had finally rewarded her for all her suffering. She even got a tattoo with her firstborn's name on her ankle. Those were cloudless times, filled with sincere warmth and care. Carlos turned out to be a very bright and obedient boy. He excelled in school, even jumping over one grade. He played sports and was popular among his peers. In high school, the young man met a girl with whom he began a serious romantic relationship. Denise approved of the couple, as did the parents of Carlos's girlfriend. Everyone was already secretly planning their upcoming wedding. Watching her beloved son grow up, Denise was proud of him and could not get enough of her motherhood. To the envy of her friend Amy, who was constantly having conflicts with her own children, the relationship between Denise and Carlos looked perfect from the outside, full of love and respect. At some point, however, Denise thought that her son would be even better off with a sibling. She decided to adopt a second child. She chose an 8-year-old boy from Honduras named Angel. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out the way they did with Carlos. The foster brothers did not develop a sincere bond, and the atmosphere in the home became tense. In 2015, a few years after the adoption, Denise had to call the police because Angel had gone missing. When the police arrived, they found the teenager's room sparsely furnished. Bare walls, a mattress on the floor, a bucket instead of a toilet, a boarded-up window, and a lock on the door from the outside. Denise explained that she had to arrange the room so that Angel would not run away and harm himself. At the same time, the boy complained to the cops that his foster mother allegedly abused him. She beat him and made him clean the house naked. The woman was arrested on charges of child abuse. Carlos, unlike Angel, supported Denise and said that his half-brother had made it all up. Later, the case was closed due to lack of evidence. Carlos was returned to his mother, and she voluntarily relinquished her parental rights to the troubled Angel. But the residue in her soul remained. Because of the scandal, the woman was suspended from school, and the family went through hard times. After the scandal with Angel, the life of the Hollowell family seemed to improve. But in reality, the relationship between Denise and Carlos began to deteriorate. At first, the young man, who had always been an excellent student and an obedient child, began to do worse in school. Then he was caught twice drinking alcohol and using drugs. He even started selling them. Because of this, Carlos was expelled from school a few months before graduation. He hid this fact from his mother for several months. These problems, as well as the constant parties, loud music, and girls Carlos took home, led to tension in his relationship with Denise. They fought, and during one of these fights in January 2019, they got into a fight. Enraged, Carlos beat his mother, broke her arm, and damaged her pickup truck. After that, he left home and lived in another city with his friends Stephanie and Damien for several months. However, according to their testimony, even there, Denise harassed her son with phone calls and personal visits, which often ended in yelling and accusations. While living away from home, Carlos experienced severe stress, developed depression and suicidal thoughts. He even crashed his car into a tree on purpose. Denise took him to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and prescribed medication. After treatment, Carlos's mood improved, and he and his mother seemed to have reached an understanding. However, Denise had to pay a price for reconciliation. She had to fulfill her son's demands, and they were not insignificant: to buy him a reliable car to travel to college, to pay for his education and other expenses after he came of age. Carlos even made a list of these requirements and had his mother sign it in front of a notary. On June 12, 2019, Carlos returned to live with his mother. Only a month later, the murder took place. However, nothing seemed to portend trouble right after he returned home. Denise was happy to have her son with her again. They spent a lot of time together, went to family events, such as the funeral of a family friend on the day of the murder. The neighbors heard them laughing and joking at home, but this idyll was deceptive. On the morning of July 13th, Denise and Carlos went to the funeral of an old family friend. When they returned home, they bought 2 pies from the bakery, ate them, and decided to take a nap. Each went to his own room. Carlos, he said, watched YouTube, and then fell asleep. When he woke up, he answered a few messages, and then went back to sleep. After a while, he was woken up by the barking of dogs in the yard. At first, he thought his mother had let them out for a walk, but the dogs wouldn't stop, so after chasing away the remnants of his sleep, Carlos went outside. Noticing the open door, the young man began to call out to Denise and look for her around the house. Eventually, he looked into his mother's bedroom and saw a terrible scene. Denise was lying on the bed with an axe stuck in her head. She was still breathing, but unresponsive. Carlos panicked and called the emergency services. The police officers who arrived at the scene thoroughly examined the house, but found no signs of a break-in or robbery. He repeated to them the same version of events that he had told them when he called 911. He had no idea who could have killed his mother so brutally and why. He said Denise was an angel in the flesh, a sincere, kind woman, a great mother and teacher, a volunteer who lived for the sake of others. She had no enemies, only friends. Even her closest neighbors were family friends or church acquaintances. Carlos was terribly upset and confused. He insisted that he had nothing to do with the murder, and the police had no good reason not to believe him at first. At the beginning of the investigation, the investigators had 2 main versions. The murder was committed either by one of the local residents or by a family member. The first assumption was based on several facts. Neighbors recalled that something strange had been happening in their quiet neighborhood recently. Unknown people were wandering around. Pets were disappearing. Someone even cut one woman's cat in half and threw it under the door. And another woman's house was broken into by an intruder who killed her chicken with a hammer while the owners were on vacation. Shortly before the murders, a strange fire broke out in the Hollowell house itself. People began to fear for their safety and installed surveillance cameras. So the version that Denise was the victim of some psychopath or enemy seemed plausible at first. However, another version immediately came to mind: the involvement of one of Denise's sons, especially Angel. He had a grudge against his foster mother because of a scandal involving fictitious abuse and may have sought revenge. But this theory quickly fell away when police learned that at the time of the murder, Angel was in a juvenile detention center for robbery. During the subsequent investigation, law enforcement officers noticed several strange things about Carlos's behavior and his story. First of all, they were confused by how calm and detached the young man was when he talked about his mother's horrible death. He did not cry, but behaved defiantly and arrogantly. Carlos gestured a lot, moved randomly, as if trying to hide something behind his verbal flow. He answered the detectives' questions in a confused and inconsistent manner. Investigators soon found out that Carlos's relationship with his mother was far from ideal. He repeatedly quarreled with Denise, once even beating her. Among the victim's belongings, they found documents about her son's treatment for drug addiction and bipolar disorder. There were also testimonies from friends with whom the boy lived in the spring about Denise's strange behavior towards her son. She seemed to control his every move, not allowing him to live his own life. Carlos openly complained about the toxic relationship with his mother and said that he had returned home purely for selfish reasons. But the police were most alarmed by the contradictions in Carlos's own story about the day of the murder. He claimed that there were no working surveillance cameras in the house, only one broken from the outside. In fact, even during the first inspection of the house, the cops noticed traces of several video cameras inside and even found their packaging and cables. That is, the young man had blatantly lied. Then the investigators decided to find those cameras at any cost. They searched the entire area again, including the lake, and they found 3 video cameras and Denise's phone. Despite the water damage, experts were able to partially recover data from the phone. It showed that at the time of the murder, Carlos was not sleeping, as he had previously stated, but was actively using his smartphone. After receiving this evidence, investigators summoned Carlos for questioning again. At first, he continued to deny everything, but when he was told about the things he had found, he became confused and then suddenly changed his story. Now the young man claimed that he had woken up to the barking of dogs and went to the kitchen to drink water, but by some miracle, he found himself in his mother's room with an axe in his hands. After that, he allegedly suffered a blackout, and he didn't seem to remember what he had done until Denise's nosebleeds brought him back to his senses. Carlos claimed that he didn't mean to do it, that it was due to an irresistible urge, a clouding of the mind. But then, frightened and confused, he threw the murder weapon into the lake, along with the cameras and his mother's phone, and then called 911 in the hope that paramedics could still save her. After this confession, Carlos was charged with first-degree murder. He was immediately arrested. However, the investigation did not end there. There was still a trial ahead to determine the punishment for the 17-year-old who had taken the life of a loved one. On September 14, 2021, Carlos Gallowell stood trial on charges of first-degree murder. Despite the fact that the defendant was a minor, the court decided to try him as an adult offender. Prosecutors insisted that the murder had been planned in advance and demanded the most severe punishment for Carlos. Instead, the boy's lawyers argued that the murder was the result of abuse by his mother. They described Denise as a psychologically unstable woman who abused her son, humiliated him, and made too many demands. The defense argued that Carlos did not plan the crime, but committed it in a state of passion after another quarrel with his mother. In addition, the young man had mental health problems and a sense of abandonment that he carried throughout his life. These factors allegedly mitigated his guilt. However, most witnesses characterized Denise as a caring and loving mother who devoted her life to her son and did everything for him. Prosecutors argued that the boy killed her for selfish reasons, to take possession of the house, car, and bills. Carlos's aggression was rooted in his addiction to alcohol and drugs, not in his relationship with Denise. She, like any mother, wanted to protect her son from this and remind him of family values, and she paid for it with her life. After weighing all the arguments, the court found Carlos Galloway guilty of the premeditated murder of Denise Galloway and sentenced him to life imprisonment. His chances for early release are minimal. According to the judge, The young man committed a horrific, unjustified crime against the closest person to him, his mother, who loved him endlessly and who was defenseless before his attack. Carlos showed not only cruelty, but also cunning. He was not even deterred by the fact that his foster mother had once saved him from life in an orphanage and had always taken care of him. The judge also noted that the evidence against Carlos was overwhelming, and his guilt was beyond doubt. A psychiatric examination showed that the defendant had 16 out of 20 signs of a person with antisocial behavior, incapable of remorse and correction. Therefore, the only possible punishment for him could be a life sentence. During the hearings, Carlos made a speech in which he apologized to his mother for his terrible deed. He said that he regretted what he had done every day and was ready to suffer any punishment. However, Denise's relatives and friends perceived these words as insincere and contrived. In subsequent interviews, Carlos repeated that he killed his mother in a fit of anger after she had repeatedly reproached and insulted him. She wanted him to go to college, but he only wanted to go out with his friends. According to him, the relationship between him and Denise deteriorated after Angel came into the family, which made his mother toxic. However, Carlos admitted that nothing justifies his crime, and he generally agrees with his punishment. After all, since he took a person's life, he has to pay for it himself. The story of Denise Gallowell and her adopted son Carlos is a tragedy that combines the extremes of human relationships: love and hate, trust and betrayal, hope and disappointment. It's hard to believe that the boy she took in from an orphanage in a distant country became her murderer. For many years, Denise gave her son warmth, care, and opportunities for a better future, and in return, she received a horrible death at his hands. We can argue for a long time why this happened and who is to blame. Perhaps despite all her love, Denise did not always find the right approach to a troubled teenager. Excessive control and pressure on Carlos, especially against the backdrop of his addictions and psychological problems, could have backfired. Not all children respond to strict parenting in the same way. Some children need more freedom and understanding to realize their potential. However, this certainly does not justify the murders. Another important aspect of this story is the problem of adopting children from dysfunctional families or third-world countries. Unfortunately, the sincere love and care of new parents is not always enough to heal the trauma of an abandoned child. Such children often need serious psychological help to socialize in a new environment and learn to trust people. This help should be provided by relevant services and specialists. Sometimes the desire of adoptive parents alone is not enough. Nevertheless, the most sympathetic person in this story is Denise herself, a woman who wanted to give a mother's love to disadvantaged children, instead found a horrible death at the hands of the one she loved the most. Carlos, despite his young age, received a harsh but just punishment. He wasted the chance given to him by fate and destroyed his life with his own hands. Perhaps his years behind bars will give him time for true repentance and spiritual rebirth. The story of the Gallowell family is a warning to all parents, guardians, and society as a whole. Child abuse is equally harmful as indulging their whims. Each child is unique, with his or her own character and needs. Parental wisdom is to feel them and delicately channel the child's energy in the right direction, not to suppress his or her will. And of course, no domestic quarrels, life's troubles, or personal grievances can be the cause of violence, let alone murder. Because someone who deliberately commits such a crime destroys not only someone else's life, but also their own. And the reckoning is inevitable.